I think I was just kind of combobulated and everything. Yeah, thank you. You know what I mean? I don't know why I didn't do that. You know? Oh, now I want to share it. Okay. Okay. The citizenry. Welcome back. This is Kathleen Wells, the host of the Naked Truth Report, and I'm joined with Professor Andreas Wimmer, who is a professor of sociology and political philosophy at Columbia University, and we're talking about nationalism. And he was telling me that my position is a little unreasonable. So let's dig deeper into this, Professor Wimmer.
Yes, I'm here.
Tell me a little more why I'm being unreasonable when I feel that when I say that folks who are not citizens in the country are oppressive to citizens in the country, burdensome.
Well, we were talking about whether undocumented immigrants are responsible for the crisis of homelessness.
No, I didn't word it quite like that, did I? I said they made them a permanent underclass.
Right, and
Okay.
you connected that to homelessness, and you made implicitly or explicitly, I think, undocumented immigrants responsible for that. And I think a way to kind of look at this a little bit more systematically and without any, exaggerations is to look at the situation in a city that has lots of undocumented immigrants like LA compared to a city that has much fewer, let's say Baltimore, and or any other city on the north East Coast. And you will see that the situation of African Americans specifically is not that different from each other. And so I don't think that you can just say that undocumented immigration is to blame for all kinds of problems, injustices, and so on that the African American community experiences. I think that's just not right.
Well, it is exacerbates. It's a contributing factor. I think that, I had the building inspector on my show, and they have 80% of the construction jobs. So they have exacerbated. In fact, this is my position. High immigration has exacerbated the relegating of Black Americans to a permanent underclass. High immigration since the 1800s, you see. That's the position.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think there's some truth in that, as I said before. So in cities that have lots of immigration, undocumented immigration, indeed, it depresses wages at the lower end of the wage scale, and it creates a problem of unemployment. And that's, economics has taught us that. There's some good study by a Yale economics professor called James and so on that has shown that it is indeed a problem for African Americans specifically. But the problem, the contribution of that is relatively small. So yes, as you say, it exacerbates the problem, but it is not a major factor. And I think one has to just keep in mind when one talks about these things.
Okay. So, but one of the main things that when you talk about nationalism is that you talk about it's for the we want the citizens to benefit. How do you feel about taking a call? I have one call. I know you don't want to stay on the whole time, but are you comfortable with taking a phone call? A question?
Sure.
Okay, great. Mel. Hi, Mel. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
With all due respect to this gentleman, we have been putting up with this high propensity Democratic voters being put into the country by Senator Ted Kennedy for 35 years. And eventually they'll put the Republicans out of business and we'll lose our checks and balances. And what happens is that this happened with Abraham Lincoln. He was a Whig. That when they went out of business, it was replaced by the Republican Party. And this has been I wish the professor had realized that these numbers have been skewed. They intentionally don't keep the numbers, especially in the prisons. They keep us in the dark. That's a political stunt. And so what I'm saying is that actually this thing really started at the turn of the century when we brought in 14 million immigrants from Ellis Island. Then we had, if I'm not mistaken, a 41-year immigration timeout from 1924 to 65, and that's when Ted Kennedy started this whole thing again. They haven't enforced our immigration laws legitimately since Eisenhower. And I think that I think this has to be more well thought out.
Your response?
Well, I think one has to be a little bit careful here and not just demonize immigration as a whole. I think that would be a grave mistake.
One of the is justified.
One of the strengths of this country is that it had, historically speaking, relatively open immigration rules, and lots of the economic, intellectual vibrancy of this country is due to the people who came here.
Here's the funny thing.
To recruit talented people from all over the world to come here and make a contribution to this country has been one of the major strengths. So is the current immigration regime the best one that this country could have? Probably not.
Can you hear me?
Wait.
Yeah.
Let him finish.
Kathleen, I got to say one thing here. People are not against immigration. That's a farce. People want value for value. They want to make immigration a definitive asset, not a liability. It's so simple. And the people that don't want this are the elitists, the special interests, the K Street people, the lobbyists, because they want a chunk of the action. They want to get as much as they can out of this thing. They want the cheap labor, the demographic shifts, and go down the list.
Yeah, that's. I think it's kind of true. There's an unholy coalition between various forces, political forces, lobbyist group, and so on, that has produced this long-standing tolerance in this country towards undocumented immigration. The agricultural interests, the building, the construction interests, and by the way, this cuts across the party lines. You know, you have supporters of this system that has existed for a long time and that has tolerated undocumented immigration on the Republican side and on the Democratic side.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true that this is not serving the interests of the country as a whole very well. And I'm very much in favor of a complete overhaul of the immigration system that would actually prioritize the needs of the economy and of the country as a whole over kind of special interests, agriculture, construction, and things like that. So I think we're more or less in agreement on that.
Thank you. Kathleen, can I finish up with one thing?
Okay.
We tried this already with the Mazzoli-Simpson bill, the Reagan amnesty. They promised him you get barriers, E-Verify, and so forth. And they didn't enforce our immigration laws at all. I mean, it was just, they've had several amnesties people don't even know about under the table. And if you know what I mean. And so when they won't enforce our laws and they're determined, that cheap labor is such an enticing thing, and they're willing to give up the country. I think the Republicans. I mean, look at the Republican Party in California. 1996, they held the governorship, the Senate, and Assembly. Today, there's not one statewide office holder. They had 14 congressional seats this last time around. They lost 7 of them. That isn't right. There's something wrong here. I think everybody listening can kind of go along with what I'm saying here.
We're out of balance here. You know, I think that's what I was trying to inform Professor Wimmer about. Los Angeles is the epicenter for massive illegal immigration. This has been going on for decades. I don't think we're unreasonable when we are expressing ourselves in these sort of, anxious terms, in this anxious way, because this has been going on for decades. And as I said, in the 1800s, Frederick Douglass, W. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, in the 1800s, these Black intellectuals talked about how high immigration is relegating Black Americans, Native Black Americans, to a permanent underclass. So, our sense of anxiety is real. It's not fiction,
But you see, Kathleen, now you're kind of flipping back of attributing all the problems of African Americans to illegal immigration.
No, because I do talk about the lack of...
It's a contributing factor, but it's not the major factor. And that's just what, if you compare across cities that have more or less undocumented immigration, that's the conclusion that you come up with. And I think you can flipping back again to demonizing undocumented immigration and attributing all kinds of ills solely and exclusively to undocumented immigration. And I think that's not right.
That's not fair. Well, I do talk about the liberal ideology generally has, like, the lack free sex feminism has given us broken families. I do talk about that. I talk about because I think the family is the most important institution in society. Our families are broken down not because of illegal aliens, but because of liberal ideology, free sex feminism. So I do say those things also, and I talk about other things like just liberal ideology generally. The Democrats have, because I used to be a progressive Democrat, and so
I know that. What a turnaround!
How did you know that?
I just looked you up on the web.
Oh, yeah. Well, I used to be a progressive, and I've just come full circle, actually, because I believe that, racism is a competition between groups, and my group has been failing forever. That's the position I take. Why don't we take one more call? Do you mind?
Okay.
Okay, great. I really appreciate you. I know we kind of had our times mixed up, and I know you had dinner planned, and so why don't we take a call from Nancy and Van Nuys? Hi, Nancy.
Hey, I love your show.
Thank you.
I just started listening recently, but back to the first time I heard President Trump talk about nationalism, and they twisted it all around. He was saying they want us to go be globalists. I don't believe in that. We are a sovereign country. I believe in being a nationalist. And people ran with it that he's a white supremacist. And nationalist, he believes in every country. You have your own. You don't want one world order like the Bushes used to. The first president, the one that passed away, he was always talking about, and we will be a one world order, and we're going headed to a one world order. Yes. And that's in the Bible. It will happen, but you don't have to push it. And President Trump meant to say he believes in being nationalist. You take care of your nation, everybody to your nation. And they took it and twisted it around. I don't know what's happening.
Right. Well, Professor Wimmer, how do you feel about globalism? Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, okay. So the statement, national or American interests have to come first. I mean, that's kind of a position that every government since for a long time would actually, underwrite. So I don't think that this is something new to say that. The question is, what kind of international order is best serving American interests? And that's where the big disagreement starts. And so the idea that was actually the foreign policy consensus between Democrats and Republicans up to, a couple of years ago, basically the rise of Trump, the consensus was that America has to lead, that the international order has to be deeply, shaped by America's interests, and that the U.S. has to actually invest resources, troops, blood, treasure into that order. So that was the consensus, and now what some in the environment of Trump seem to say is that this is too expensive and that this is not actually serving our interests the best. So I think, and that a lighter footprint in foreign policy with less interference in other countries and so on, that would be the right approach. And I kind of agree with that. I think that's a reasonable position. I'm wondering then why the Trump government has increased the budget of the Pentagon quite dramatically, actually.
Because he says there's peace through strength.
So, peace through strength. But what about the peace dividend? What about if you want to have a lighter imprint of American foreign policy in the world, why not then reduce also the costs that we're all paying, which is massive in terms of tax dollars and so on? Do we really need a budget, a military budget that is as big as the next 8 countries in the world combined? So these are the kind of questions that I think are actually not asked in the contemporary debate. And I think just saying nationalism, we have to prioritize American interests, that's kind of cheap because every American government has done that in the past. The question is how. How are American interests best served?
But how are you strong if you're not building up your military?
Well, the question is how big you want this military to be. Right now, it's among us, it's a giant. Do we need a giant? If we want to have a lesser imprint, can you imagine what a reduced military budget? I'm not advocating. I'm not a pacifist. I don't say that we shouldn't have any military area. But can you imagine the resources that would be freed from a reduced military budget that could be invested in infrastructure, that could be invested in all kinds of things, including helping to combat the inequality in infrastructure across different communities?
You know, I'm not a military expert, so I don't know all the details, but, clearly they feel that that needs to be spent. They know you don't know all the details either. We're on the outside looking in. So they must feel that this needs to be spent, that amount that they're spending.
Well, routinely, the generals in the past have said, we don't want these new equipment. We don't need that. And Congress has imposed increased budget for political reasons because it's popular with their constituencies, have imposed increased military budgets on the generals. So if you would listen just to the generals, we would have a smaller actually budget for the Pentagon than we have now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to do one more. Do you mind one more? What about Brent?
Okay, that's the last one, okay?
Okay, this is the last one. Thank you. We're almost finished. Right. I appreciate it. Brent in LA. Hi, Brent.
Hi, Kathleen. Yes, I wanted to discuss, it seems like the conversation has gotten off in a lot of different directions. And the words nationalism, immigration, family, and now military have come up. and to me, it seems like what we're dealing with is we've lost sight of the fundamental values that need to be introduced. How productive, healthy, moral, ethical is our nationalism, or our immigration, or our families, or our military? The military, for example, it has to be as big as it needs to be. And if the monsters we face are enormous, then we need an enormous military. But if the world reforms itself, we need a very small military. When it comes to nationalism, it isn't that we ugly nationalism, white supremacist nationalism, racist nationalism, that's the problem. But not a moral, ethical, constitutional, biblically based nationalism. That's a magnificent blessing to the world.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Brett. Your response?
Yeah, I agree. An inclusionary form of nationalism is better than an exclusionary form. And the question is how to find a good, morally appropriate and inclusionary, diverse nationalism. And I'm not sure whether the current government is on that road, to be honest.
You're not sure we're on that road? I'm
not sure whether the current White House represents that kind of nationalism.
Well, as long as Native Black Americans are relegated to a permanent underclass, I'm going to keep talking about it. That's my obligation. That's what I do on the Naked Truth Report. I want to thank you, Professor Wimmer, for being a guest on the show. I enjoyed it so much, and you challenged me to think about these things a little more deeper, I think, possibly.
All right. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you, Professor Wimmer. And thank you, Truth Warriors and Mythbusters out there. And next week, we have another guest. It's Professor Riley. He's a professor at Kentucky, at a university in Kentucky. I can't remember his first name. Anyway, we're going to have Professor Riley next week. So I'll see you next week. Thanks.